So you know how you get into the classroom and all your students are right where they need to be? Everyone is on grade level. Everyone enjoys learning, and of course they love to read, right? Right. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to the Urban and Educating Podcast, where it's all about learning the best strategies for classroom management, student engagement, and living your best life as a game-changing educator. Here's your host, Dr. Sean Woodley.
Greetings and salutations, Urban and Educating Podcast listeners. I am your host, Dr. Sean Woodley, and here we learn how to flourish in the classroom. We go to college, study hard for 4 years or more, walk into the classroom with this fire in our eyes, and we're ready to teach. We're ready to change and mold lives. The perfect classroom, all your students are right where they need to be. Everybody's on grade level. Everybody really enjoys and loves to learn. And of course, everybody loves reading. And that's in a perfect world, when in actuality, everybody's all over the place. Some students are ahead, some are right where they need to be, and some are well below where they need to be. What can you do? You became an educator because you believe that the children are our future and we need to teach them well. But what do you do in circumstances like this where some are here, some are there, and some are everywhere? Especially when it comes to topics like reading. And if the children already don't have that desire and that love and that passion for reading like you or I might have, how do you get them to develop that passion? How do you get them to learn these competencies and these standards and objectives that you're trying to get them to learn? Situations like this are tough because you not only have to get them to certain levels and you have certain expectations for their reading and comprehension, but to do that in the first place, you have to get them to even want to read and to want to learn the material. We try different things in the classroom. We try different things to ignite that fire in them, to get them to want to learn the subject matter. We bribe, we convince, and something may work temporarily, but it doesn't last. How can we really and truly ignite that passion in our students to really want to learn and desire to learn more and to want to try their hardest each and every day? And that's what we're talking about today. We're speaking with a dynamic educator in the New York City school system named Miss Erika Buddington. And she consistently gets her students excited about reading and all things English language arts related, which is extremely commendable. I wanted to find out a little more about Erika, who she is and what her educational background was and how she got started on this journey of fulfillment as an educator.
I am from Brooklyn, New York, also Uniondale, New York, which is on Long Island. For those that aren't familiar, I guess my life has been split between those two places. I went to school, Hampton University.
I'm sorry, what school?
I went to Hampton University.
There we go. Yes.
Phi Ogre. I went to NYU after that for creative writing, and right now I'm working as a 6th grade ELA teacher, as well as a social justice curriculum lead for Dr. Perry and Sean P. Diddy Combs' new school. And I also own a company called Langston League that designs equitable and culturally relevant curriculum for children of color. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Awesome. Really heavy in these educational streets, and I absolutely love it. Finding out some more about Erika, I was able to uncover that she went into college with absolutely no plans to be a classroom educator. So I asked her, how did that unfold and what transpired? What changed to help you switch your major and your career trajectory ultimately to get into the classroom?
I went to Hampton and I was actually at the journalism school at Scripps. And my first year there, I remember thinking that, I wanted to write. I didn't want to write it from a neutral perspective. I wanted to write my opinion all the time. I wanted to write fiction. I wanted to write memoir. There were all these different genres I was experimenting with. And so a friend of mine suggested that I, go to the English department. And I'll never forget, it was a really, I'm not going to say names, but it was a really pertinent moment in my life.
Sure.
Where I went to hand in the paperwork to switch majors, and I had to get signed by certain folks at the School of Journalism. And as I'm walking out with the signature, I heard this person say behind me to another colleague, well, they all can't handle the school. They're all not made to be writers. And I was like, wow. So I'll never forget that. But I went to the English school. I went to study English arts. And I had literature courses with some really awesome professors, Professor Rand Walker being one of them. And I remember them always telling me that I had this knack for teaching, because if anybody needed advice in class, if there was a younger student there that was struggling with their creative work or their analyzation of the literature, I was always, hey, I could help you. Like, what do you need? And so when the opportunity was finally offered to me my junior year to work with a group called Bella Girls out in Hampton, which is, they serve young women that are coming out of group homes or juvenile detention centers, trying to make the transition back into, going back to school. When I started working with them, that was it. Like, I was completely sucked in. And then I realized that all of my professors were right about me. And so, I went from just playing around with the idea to actually doing this work every single day since the first day I stepped into teaching formally. I left Hampton and I was a substitute for about a year. And after a year, Harlem Children's Zone called me up and my career trajectory just shot up from that point. Yeah.
I found Erika's story to be fascinating, if nothing else, because it reminded me a lot of my own. And I wanted to dig a little deeper. So I asked her, when did she start to notice that there was an issue, and what did she do to solve the problem?
Well, when I first entered the world of teaching, a lot of the texts that were given to my students were not reflective of who they were. So we're reading Maniac McGee, we're reading Percy Jackson, we're reading Harry Potter. And although they're great texts with some fantastical elements and some youthful things that they can correlate with, it wasn't who they were. They couldn't see themselves in the book. And I'll never forget, my mother always tells this story whenever she beams with pride. My daughter's an educator. That I used to bring my books to her and say, Mommy, I'm not in story. And she didn't understand what I meant until she was walking down the block one day and she passed an African-American bookstore, and all of the children's books had little brown, black boys and girls on the cover. And so she ended up bringing me home one of Nikki Giovanni's collection of poetry, and I think another poetry book called Make a Joyful Noise, with tons of black children on the front cover. And one in particular had a little girl with Afro puffs and like gap teeth. And that's exactly how I looked at that age. And so I ran, she gave it to me and I ran around the house like, Mommy, I'm on the cover. I'm in the book. Right. And so she finally understood what I meant. And so I had that epiphany as I was teaching at Harlem Children's Zone my first and second year. I remember there were young men who were like, I don't read. Like, I'm not reading this. This is not what I do. And I didn't know how to get them invested in what we were working on. And there was a young man in particular who was a famous doodler. When he was supposed to be writing his work, he was doodling.
Famous doodler. And, we've all had those.
And we couldn't get him to do anything but draw. And so I noticed that he did have some. He had talent. Right, he was really amazing. And they were like, you have this really great connection with some of our young men, and we'd love for you to come in and see if you can get through to him, because you're a writer, and, he shows interest in creative writing, but he's not actually doing the work. And so I came and I spoke with him, and I remember saying to him that I knew a young man who had the same issues that he did, and, he was going in and out of different schools, and they were trying to get him into an alternative high school. And so I gave him this whole spiel about a young Caribbean man like he was that had these same issues, that was going in and out of different schools. And, he's like, yeah, oh, he sounds like me. Like, tell me about what's his name? And I'm like, his name is Jean-Michel Basquiat. And he's like, oh, that's a interesting name. And I remember bringing him Phoebe Hoban's A Quick Killing in Art. And, it was very intense text for a 15-year-old. But he ate it up. Like, he was obsessed with it. He's like, oh my God, this reminds me of like my relationship with my father when I tell him I want to be an artist. And, he's like, that's not lucrative. And it was just a really good conversation with a young man that was telling me I don't read. I'm like, but look at you, you're reading. And he's like, yeah, well, I mean, I guess I do read when it's something that I like. And I just kept bringing him books. Like, I was looking for everything that reflected his experience and just bringing it to him. And now he's the most avid reader that I know. And he goes to Pratt and he studies graphic design, and he was a kid we couldn't get to pick up a pencil and do anything.
So it wasn't that he didn't read, he just didn't come across anything that maybe he could relate to or that would hold his interest.
Exactly. And so, I mean, it's important that educators build that cultural competence,
Yes.
That they teach cross-cultural or multicultural things because they're in that sort of setting, right? You don't have to be Black to do that. Let's be real.
Absolutely.
Right? It's something that's definitely learned. It's something that I had to learn. I had to negate my privilege in several ways. I had two parents who were super invested in me that put me in all sorts of alternative and supplemental programming. So when I walk into a room and, my 15-year-olds aren't writing on the level that they should be, I can't say, well, at 15, I was writing this way or I was reading this, because I didn't have the same context that they had. So, I mean, to get back to your question, I had to learn that quickly. And within my third year, I was doing everything from, creating rap songs for students to retain the difference between homonyms and, different strategies that we were utilizing to create essays and short responses, to, bringing in new texts and fighting in those beginning and end of year meetings for these books. Like, absolutely. Listen, I'm trying to get these kids to read some Masada. I'm trying to, you keep in your mission statements, you want to build empathetic citizens and you want kids to be aware of social justice and you want them to be activists, but the curriculum does not embody that. And so I just became really obsessed with it. And then now it's naturally a part of what I do. Like, the anecdotes just come out now because I've been doing it for so many years. So if we're talking about some of the civil unrest during Greece and its creation of societal structures and government, right? I'm talking about the marginalization of African Americans and how, we created a revolution the same way because we felt marginalized. And so did the folks in Greece, that weren't a part of the caste system on a certain level. And so my students they weren't enamored with the work before, but when they hear that connection to a movement that they do know, or someone that they do understand, or someone that looks like them, they're like, oh, I get it, right? And so I'm always making those cross-cultural connections.
Let me ask you a question. You mentioned something. I found it very interesting, and I actually had to go back and ask her to explain a little bit more, because she said something that I myself could very much relate to about her privilege in the classroom, and an assumption that I too had as an educator that I'm Black, I'm teaching students that are mostly Black. There's an instant connection, but that's definitely not always the case. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about what she did in that particular instance once she came to that realization, and how she was able to resolve that. It's
letting go all assumptions, right? And so I literally had to learn the context of every single student, right? And that's not hard to do, right? A lot of folks, like, I hear this comment all the time. I teach 112 or I teach 125 kids, and how can I? You better learn it, right? Because that's the only way you're going to become great at your job. And so a simple, how was your day? How are you doing? What's going on in your life? It's more than just the first day survey of what do you like to eat that you eventually throw in the garbage, or what do you enjoy doing at home? Like, right? You're preaching now. You're preaching now. Yeah, it's more than that first day survey. It's an ongoing conversation with that community with that family, with that parent, and with that child, right? If you don't have context, you can't build those bridges. And so the minute I got that context, I realized that I was a privileged jerk who was using my assumptions within my teaching. And once I let those things go, it became a lot easier, right? And so if I can give a specific example,
Sure.
There was a young man who came in every day and like, he got on my last nerves. And I couldn't for the life of me understand, this is my first year teaching, like how a child had been pushed through the ranks, like every single level that was like 6 grade levels behind. And every day it was like, I'm not writing and just throwing things on the floor and I'm not doing it and you can't make me. And I had no context. I was just like, oh, he's just rude. Right? And I don't like him and he gets on my nerves. And after a while, talking to his mother every single day, I mean, at first I was just making the calls for negative things. Like, he threw the book on the floor today. He wasn't doing, XYZ. It was always something negative. And one day, during a conference, she stood behind my desk and she's like, you come into school every day with your suit on and, you stand behind that desk, but you don't even ask us like what's going on or what's going on with him. And you don't have any context to my kid. And how dare you? And in that moment, I was humbled because she was right. Like I'd known her kid for about 5-6 months at this point. Now I hadn't asked a thing about him. All I'd asked him was, where's my homework? Where's my this? Where's my that? I didn't know anything about him. I knew his name. I knew how old he was. And I knew the services I was there to provide. That was about it. And once I got to know him, right, and once I got to know Mom and his circumstances, I was able to modify the curriculum in a way that, better served him. And so, like, it's that privilege, it's those assumptions. And even, I'm thinking, like, I'm a Black girl.
Right. I can
I
relate.
listen to the same music as them. I'm 21. I'm young. I would connect with the kids. Absolutely not.
And you know what? That's such a valuable insight because I too, when in my first year of teaching, I went into the classroom and teaching in an urban area. And I went in with just this assumption that I'll automatically be able to relate to the kids just off GP because I'm a younger educator and because I listen to the latest hip hop and I come into school and I know about the latest sneakers and fashion and things like that. Although I don't wear that to work, I know about it. So I automatically have that connection. They'll see that in me and they'll respect me automatically. And when I had that revelation, that rude awakening, I too, in your situation, was humbled, and it took a lot of self-reflection. It took the self-awareness for me to recognize that I had some improving to do, and then to go back and say, all right, now what do I need to change, and how can I, as you mentioned, bridge that gap? So I think that's fabulous. It really is. So going back to equitable curriculum, what advice could you give someone who's teaching in a situation where the curriculum is not equitable?
For me, I've been in that space and it's definitely an ongoing conversation. So that's the first step, right? Like you can't be afraid to speak up when you're, and usually they send out the reading list and they send out emails when they're deciding on books for students. And I remember getting those emails and I would never say anything. I'd just be like, okay, thanks. Like, right. But then a few years later, I started responding and saying, hey, there are 322 books on this list for the library next year. And 10 of them are Walter Dean Myers. And it seems like y'all don't know any other Black authors or authors of color. We sit in staff meetings and folks, they ask you, are there any questions or any suggestions? And folks get real quiet because they just want to get out of the staff meeting and go do whatever classroom setup they have to do. But now I started saying, well, hey, can I bring this teaching artist or can I have this poet come? I started asking real questions in those spaces. And it's better to do it in those spaces because when you ask them one-on-one, an administrator will tell you no.
Uh-huh.
Later on, they can say, oh, well, I mean, it wasn't that I was saying no, if they change and flip the script, right? But when you ask it in a communal space
Oh,
in
yeah.
front of 12 other teachers, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And so hey, remember when you said I could X, Y, Z in front of 12 other people? They don't want to lessen staff morale. They're more likely to do it. And so you're doing it in a way that's not going to cost you your job, right?
and it encourages others to ask questions like that too.
Yeah, it does. And that's what I noticed. It did catch on, right? I asked for a teaching artist to come in, or I'd asked for a new book or anything in those communal spaces. And suddenly other teachers next week, it was like, oh, I have this friend who's a judge. And right now we're learning the Constitution. Can I bring her in? And I'm like, okay, now we're getting live. So, I mean, that's the first step. And then the second step is, and I'm going to say this with a disclaimer that if you get fired doing this, like, you chose it.
It's on you. It's on you. It's on you.
But sometimes you got to break and bend the rules, right? And schools are all about data. And if the data shows that what you're doing is working, when it comes time to re-sign your contract or when it comes time to discuss next year, you can bring that data to the table and say, hey, what I was doing was working. And I know you didn't know I was doing it, right? But here's what I was doing. And so
asking for forgiveness instead of permission.
Exactly. And so, I mean, it's like every year there are certain schools that do this creativity symposium where you come through with something you tried in your classroom that was within the parameters of whatever they said you could do. But my creativity symposium used to be about whatever I wanted to do. And sometimes it was having the students read more than one text at a time and not just pairing passages in preparation for state tests, but pairing books, right? So we're reading one nonfiction text and a fiction text together, or, it was studying the Constitution alongside the Black Panthers 10-point program and, how one influenced the other, and talking about laws and lists of amendments, et cetera. And so, none of that was cleared, and it had to be cleared by an instructional leader or a curriculum coach. None of it was cleared, but it works. And so when the data came out, it was like, oh, what were you doing? And I was like, well, now that
let's, I got you.
So that's my second piece of advice. Yeah.
Let's switch it up a little bit. So now I have some fun questions for you, if you will.
Awesome.
From your students' perspective, how would they describe Miss Buddington?
Okay, I'm going to actually use student language. I have a really awesome student. His name is Stan.
Oh, yeah, my life with Stan.
And I'm literally sitting in my room one day and I hear him standing outside. So they give the new students tours of the school. And there was a new student who was getting a tour from our office manager, and he asked Stan, like, what's Miss Buddington's class like? And Stan was like, yo, she's crazy, but she's lit. So, it's an equilibrium. It's
Absolutely.
like I don't play. They're well aware that I don't play.
Oh, yes.
But I'm fun,
And they recognize that they're learning.
Yes.
Indeed. All right. So what was your worst moment in the classroom?
My worst moment in the classroom.
Or as an educator, what was maybe something that's it was maybe your lowest point as an educator, or just a terrible experience?
So I think my worst moment in the classroom was, there was one day that a young man was missing. And I know this because he and I used to rap all the time. Like, he come in the back of the room. He's like, yo, the teachers is buzzing. And they say, you rap and you do poetry. And I'm like, yeah, a little bit. And so he's like, oh, you got bars? Let's go. And so like we go back and forth all the time after class. And so when he's disappeared for a week, I was like, okay, like, this is weird. We're calling home. Mom was like, I don't know where he's at. I don't care. And I never forget, he walked in on like the 5th day of him being absent and, sat down, and he was in being himself. And I'm like, yo, what's up? Like, what's going on? Like, where you been? And he's like, can we talk about it after class? I'm like, sure. So he like steps outside with me and I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, yo, I got shot 4 days ago, but I don't really want to talk about it. And it was like he said it like, you know, I slipped and fell and sprained my ankle. Like I'm like, what? Like, and you know, he just did not want to talk about it at all. And I remember like going to the teacher's lounge on prep and just sitting there like, how do I coach him? Like, how do I have this conversation with him? How do I get him to open up? Right. Because it was very clear that he was hurting, like his spirit, like he's a really bright and energetic student. It was like dark that day. And so, you know, I had kind of coached myself as to how to talk to him. I went to the counselor and was like, okay, what do I say? And she kind of like helped me through it.
Good move.
I remember going back into the classroom to teach the next class. And through the glass, I saw them arrest this kid. And like in the hallway. And I was like, oh my God. Like that was my worst moment for me. Because I never got to talk to him again. Like I don't think it happened to him. Like, but for me, it was like the very real outside context that I was talking about earlier.
Right.
Making it into my classroom.
Making its way inside. Now, how does someone who goes through that bounce back and continue to move forward for the rest of your students?
I mean, it's just like I said earlier, right? It's about learning the context. I mean, that was earlier on in my teaching days. So it was like, yeah, he would come in the back of the classroom, breathe, rap and joke here and there, but I really didn't know much about him, right? But now I can tell you what my kids eat, what time they get home, who their mamas are, like, you know, what their parents do for a living. I can tell you everything about them. And that's because like I'm all up in their business.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
You know, who's texting who was at Dante's party last weekend and who danced with who. Like I know everything. I'm all up in the tea because, you know, they need you to be. Like they say like stay out of my business. But real talk, they need you to be.
They need you and they want that. Right? Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. What advice would you give your first year teaching self? If you can go back right now, sit down next to yourself and say, you know what? This is what you need to know. What one piece of advice?
I would tell her to roll her sleeves up. Like, I feel like she walked in every day with this, oh, I gotta look like a teacher, move like a teacher, planner, organizer. Like none of that stuff matters, right? What matters is that you rolled your sleeves up and you switch from your heels to your kicks and you went and play kickball with everybody. What matters is that you sat in the station instead of just walking around and aggressively monitoring, right? You sat in the station with the kids and you bounced from station to station and you acted like you were one of the kids and you jumped in on the project and, you know, pushed them forward. I would tell her to be more youth-centered in her teaching. Like allow kids to be immersed in creating the curriculum with you. Allow kids to act crazy sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Like let them let loose and dance on the tables and teach you the nay or like whatever, right? Like all those things matter. The things that are not in the handbook, the things that are not in school, that no one teaches you, they matter just as much as the academic portion.
Absolutely.
That's what I would tell her.
Couldn't agree with you more there. And finally, what's maybe one of the funniest things that happened to you in the classroom?
Okay, this is a great question because I have a young man named Stan, as I mentioned before, in my class, and he's crazy. Like I love him, but he's like insane. I think the funniest thing that's ever happened to me in the classroom was, you know, he has he has a way of saying things that are like really disrespectful in the moment. But then, I'm trying to find a way to say this. Like they're disrespectful in the moment and you're like, step outside. Like it's like, this is not okay. I'm writing you up. But then you think about it and you're like, yo, he's right. Like,
and you hate that. It's like, ugh.
It drives me crazy. So, there was a moment where another young man, these are not the students' real names, by the way.
I know.
Marcus was like going in on him. You know, he goes in on him every day. They go back and forth. So Marcus's grandfather is like a Trump supporter, got a Trump sticker on his back, the back of his pickup truck, like all that jazz. And, you know, he's very immersed in that rhetoric, like give Trump a chance. And it's so interesting because Stan is raised by a very liberal family. And so they go back and forth every day, all day. It's like watching CNN. And so, you know, Marcus was saying that, we were learning about the patricians and the plebeians in ancient Greece, and ancient Rome, I apologize. And they're going back and forth about, why shouldn't the wealthy class make laws, right? They're more intelligent. The same way, I'm more intelligent in this classroom. So that's Marcus.
Uh-huh.
And Stan is like seriously, dude,
Uh-huh.
like this is not okay. We shouldn't marginalize folks. And they're having this really heated and amazing debate. And I was so excited about like this conversation that they're having. And, eventually it got crazy. Stan said something like, "Oh, I'm trying to make real-time connections in class, and you try to connect with this fade." And and Marcus was like, who you talking to? So I was like, okay, Stan, please step outside. Stan steps outside, and eventually, Marcus keeps going with his whole conversation of, patricians were just wealthy, they were probably the smartest, etc. And he runs back in and he's like, "Yo, we live in the same building, Marcus. Your mama's a pleb. We all plebs." It was hilarious. And so they keep me thoroughly entertained. If you want to read more of that, you can go to facebook.com/mylifewithstan because I do tabs.
Let me be one to tell anybody that is not familiar with My Life with Stan that it is hilarious and entertaining, if nothing else. And I love each and every one of the stories. I feel like I know Stan. I've met my own Stans, plural, if you will. So I'm right there with you. And I think it's fantastic that you're being, so transparent with that. And you talk about the good and the bad that comes along with that. And it shows the learning and the growth of yourself as an educator. I think it's fantastic.
I appreciate that.
So now going into some interesting and quite hilarious stories, if I do say so myself, that Erika shares. And all the information is in the show notes. You can find it at www.urbaneducating.com/episode1. I'll have links to her books and Facebook page that highlights My Life with Stan. Take a second to read that. I promise you will not be disappointed. Understanding the fact that life of an educator outside the classroom is just as important, if not more, and affects what happens in the classroom. I asked Erika a little bit about some of her extracurricular activities and what she does, and coincidentally, it ties perfectly into what she does in the classroom and even generates some extra income for her.
Well, I write on a blog called ifnoonehastoldyou.com. And on ifnoonehastoldyou.com, I write flash fiction, which is short stories back to back, once a week. And folks just kind of follow the story. And when it's done, I compile all of this flash fiction and turn them into like small novellas or novels and throw them up on Amazon. So that's kind of like income that's always coming in, which is really cool. And now I'm working on a novel, to shop with an agent. So I'm really excited about that. And it's difficult to do that and teach at the same time.
Sure.
Right. Which is why the Great American Novel took so long. But in the meantime, I've had the chance to write small novellas and short stories that have, accrued me this really awesome crowd of young women who are just inspired or excited about work that connects with them, which speaks to, the same equitable, culturally relevant.
Right. It's all related. Absolutely.
Exactly. So essentially, I'm doing that with my writing too. And I'm an HBO deaf poet and a slam champion. So, I perform on the weekends and, I sell those books as a side hustle when I'm at those performances. So yeah, that's my writing side of me. And you can check out my books at erikabuddington.com/books.
Awesome. What are the titles of those?
So one is Of Micah and Men, which is just a compilation of dating stories, really horrible dating stories. One is Burrows Apart, which is a love story that goes back and forth between now and the Harlem Renaissance. Another one called Intention, which is like a love story triangle. And the last one is F-boy literature. I'm not going to say what that stands for, but it's a compilation of poems and essays about, dealing with just dating. And so I feel like they're all under the theme of love. I mean, but they're not romance novels. They're literature, I promise.
And I think, I think it's awesome that you're using your gifts and talents to share with your students inside the classroom, but then share them with the world outside of the classroom. And it's very, very obvious that you're passionate in this area, which is so needed on both ends. So I think that's fabulous and fantastic. Keep it up.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
That is not a problem. Incredibly insightful information that is immediately applicable to what we need to do every day in the classroom as educators. I want to thank Miss Erika Buddington for her time and her contribution to this podcast, because I know this information is extremely valuable and will help many, many great educators out there. Let me know what you think. Log on to facebook.com/urbaneducating. Visit the website, www.urbaneducating.com, and leave a comment. Let me know how this information has helped you to flourish in the classroom. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit our website at urbaneducating.com and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Google Play.